Good morning. Are we on? Yeah. Welcome to the Umpqua Unitarian Universal Congregation, the church that puts its faith in you. It's a place where you can be yourself, but not by yourself. I'm Martha Sinkula. I'll be your service leader today, and we're so glad that you are with us. I especially welcome those of you who might be watching from home and those who are visiting for the first time. Please stay for coffee and conversation, those who are here, so we can get to know each other better. Hope you have your cell phone turned off. Take a minute to check, please. I'd like to thank our greeters, Dana and Gemma, and Al and Mary. We had the whole crowd in the front door. It was a bum's rush. And I want to thank Jake, our media guy, who does wonderful things, Sean, our music fellow, who plays all the time, wonderful, and Jen in the office, that all of these people help put our service together. And again, thanks to every one of you who are with us today for caring to keep this very important place very vital. We are delighted to again have Reverend Dennis Reynolds. He's with us serving our congregation as an interim developmental minister on a quarter-time basis for 1 calendar year, 5 days a month. His office hours are Tuesdays 1 to 4. Give him a call. His phone number and information is on the back of the bulletin board in the back. This is in addition to dates he presents throughout the year, like today. He's paid through our Sunday services budget. He brings an extensive ministerial background in humor and insight, and he's eager to meet and work with all of us, the current committees, administration, and all, to help our congregation grow and thrive. And we're grateful for his guidance and opportunities to be here. Please pay attention to your insert that's in your order of service. On the front are the upcoming events, and on the back are the contact information, like I just mentioned. I asked Genevieve to put these in the insert so people can make these contacts as they need to. The first thing on this is sharing your religious odyssey, and Al Herring is our orchestrator of that. You want to come up, Al, and just give some extra info?
Good morning. Thank you, Martha. And the little blurb in the order of service doesn't give much detail. On the back table, there is a sheet explaining more what is going on, and we have made a change from that sheet. We were originally planning to do a 3 p.m. and 6 p.m. meeting, but 6 p.m. isn't working out with people, and this is a dark and dreary place anyway at 6 p.m. So we're focused on 3 p.m. This coming Wednesday. And I invite you to sign up. It should be very interesting. And I'm hoping we have enough people involved that we'll need to do follow-up sessions and whatever it takes to be able to let people tell their stories. Thank you.
Thank you, Al. Now it is time to take our collection for the fish food pantry. Yes, you had a hand over here. Sorry, Lily. Please. I'm sorry, I didn't see you.
Hi, I just want to tell you a little more about next Sunday's service. Some of you may remember Catherine Kern. She is an amazing Chinese musician, world-renowned. She used to come here on Sunday afternoons and do concerts. What she is bringing to us are 4 selections of music on the zither and other Chinese instruments, but also what is the history behind the Chinese New Year. And what I learned about that is that basic Chinese spirituality is that you live life at the moment. And when you think about that, I mean, we spend a lot of time trying to live for now. but their philosophy is at the moment. So please join us.
Okay. Now is the time in our service where we support the Fish Food Pantry with collection of food or money to help support the needs of this community. It's part of the, we're one of the 7 churches, I believe it is, that helps support. May I have a couple of people to pass baskets out? Oh, thanks, Dana. Thanks, Annan.
The words of our chalice lighting this morning are from the writer, teacher, and essayist Cornel West. And I had the opportunity to hear Dr. West speak at a Ware lecture a few General Assemblies back. And he's a professor at Princeton, author of Race Matters and many essays, and he was the editor of a book titled The Radical Martin Luther King. Martha.
Okay. We have to recognize that there cannot be relationships unless there is commitment, unless there is loyalty, unless there is love, patience, and persistence.
Never forget that justice is what love looks like in public. We invite you now to rise in body or in spirit for our opening hymn, Come Sing a Song. It's number 364 for those who like looking at the notes for us hymn in the hymnal.
Sing a song with me. Come sing.
I have a confession to make and a little bit of an explanation about the story for all ages. One, I'll let people who were worried, it's not going to be Leo Leone. I've shared here before that I've often been known to repeat Leo Leone's various stories frequently from the pulpit. I think he's one of the most profound theologians of the 20th century and a heck of an illustrator as well. But the book that I want to share is called Knock Knock, My Dad's Dream for Me by Daniel Beatty. Now, when I chose this book, my wife said, "Do you sure you want to read it or use the video of Beatty, the author, doing it as a deaf poetry piece?" And I said, "No, I want to do the book." But the fates had a different plan. The book is sitting in my office in Eugene. But thanks to Jake's magic, we have Daniel Beatty gifting you with his poetic story, Knock Knock, My Dad's Dream for Me. Thank you, Jake.
As a boy, I shared a game with my father. Played it every morning till I was 3. He would knock on my door and I'd pretend to be asleep till he got right next to the bed. Then I would get up and jump into his arms. "Good morning, Papa." And my papa, he would tell me that he loved me. We shared a game, knock knock. Until that day when the knock never came. And my mama takes me on a ride past cornfields on this never-ending highway till we reach a place of high, rusty gates. A confused little boy, I enter the building carried in my mama's arms. Knock, knock. We reach a room of windows and brown faces. Behind one of the windows sits my father. I jump out of my mama's arms and run joyously towards my papa's, only to be confronted by this window. I knock, knock, trying to break through the glass, trying to get to my father. I knock, knock as my mama pulls me away before my papa even says a word. And for years he has never said a word. And so 25 years later I write these words for the little boy in me who still awaits his papa's knock. "Papa, come home because I miss you. Miss you waking me up in the morning and telling me you love me. Papa, come home because there's things I don't know and I thought maybe you could teach me how to shave, how to dribble a ball, how to talk to a lady, how to walk like a man. Papa, come home because I decided a while back I want to be just like you, but I'm forgetting who you are." And 25 years later, a little boy cries, and so I write these words and try to heal and try to father myself, and I dream up a father who says the words my father did not. "Dear son, I'm sorry I never came home. For every lesson I failed to teach, hear these words. Shave in one direction with strong, deliberate strokes to avoid irritation. Dribble the page with the brilliance of your ballpoint pen. Walk like a god, and your goddess will come to you. No longer will I be there to knock on your door, so you must learn to knock for yourself. Knock, knock down doors of racism and poverty that I could not. Knock, knock on doors of opportunity for the lost brilliance of the black men who crowd these cells. Knock, knock with diligence for the sake of your children. Knock, knock for me, for as long as you are free, these prison gates cannot contain my spirit. The best of me still lives in you. Knock, knock with the knowledge that you are my son, but you are not my choices. Yes, we are our father's sons and daughters, but we are not their choices. But despite their absences, we are still here, still alive, still breathing, with the power to change this world, one little boy and girl at a time. Knock, knock, who's there? We are.
You can see why Suzanne had questions as to whether or not I should read that man's powerful poetry. I will bring in, to make sure it's available here, the illustrated copy, so that you have an opportunity to share with any kids that are here on a Sunday morning in a more reflective way that powerful story that the author gifted to us. And now we're going to sing we've got a kid here down to the program downstairs. And please join us in song.
Now's the time in our service. Now's the time in our service where we share our joys and concerns, joys and sorrows of milestones in our lives that you might be thinking of experiencing at this time. Those of you who would like to light a candle, please form a line to my right. And if you are lighting a spoken candle, please give your name and try to be as brief as possible so others can have a turn. We know that our financial contributions to this congregation come from sacrifice and hard work. We are so grateful for this and commit together to ensure the funds that we gather collectively do a greater good for ourselves and our world than they could have done alone. May there be an offering to sustain and grow the life and mission of this congregation, and may we give in love and in hope. For the gifts that we have received, may we be truly grateful, and may we be committed to using these gifts to make a difference in the world and to expand our beloved community.
I invite you now to continue that settling in process that Sean's music helped us to start doing, and to join in a time of meditation. And what I want to do this Sunday, and we did a version of it last week where I will share some words, and I invite you to just breathe in, remembering and noticing when I'm breathing in, I am breathing in. When I'm breathing out, I'm breathing out. And the words I'd like to share are from my Buddhist teacher, Dr. Larry Ward, PhD, who was ordained into the Dharma tradition of Thich Nhat Hanh early in this century. And Larry lived for a while on Whidbey Island when I did for a couple of years, and I got to spend a lot of time with Larry. And Larry has a unique place in American Buddhism or Vietnamese Buddhism. Come to America, he's a black Buddhist. There aren't a whole lot of those folks. And Larry's book that I'm reading from is America's Racial Karma. It's a small book. I recommend it. It's by Parallax Press, which is Thich Nhat Hanh's publishing house. And Larry wrote the following as a poetic piece in addition to the more narrative portions of the book. So I invite you in to just let Larry's words wash over you and through you as you sit, breathing in and breathing out. When they came for me, I tried to contain my fear and my heartbreak. My bones longed for home as I, sick in the bottom of a ship, became a dark currency carried over the sea. I was sold, and sold again, a commodity, an instrument of profit seduced and sustained by greed, arrogance, ignorance. Cold and beleaguered in a new land unknown, I tried to forget such horror in my bones, but the looks and whispers, even to this day, remind me. I am a class of color created by a colonial mind, missing its own self-worth. But the dance of my ancestors in my bones have kept me awake and kept me alive. I live beyond such limiting constructs of mind. I am free because I'm not confused. I am stardust awake. I am the earth and sky embracing all. I ride the wind with the eagle and the hawk. I flow with the rivers into all oceans. I touch the sun, am untouched by the moonlight, like all beings. I am nature herself, awake, powerful, resilient, generative. I offer the love of all my ancestors to your ancestors and the ancestors of all beings. I offer my presence like rain falling on the wise and the unwise, the troubled and the untroubled, the just and the unjust, so that the wounds of time may be healed in the dance of the flow of birth and death, the flow of birth and death. I invite you with gratitude to Larry for his words to take a deep cleansing breath in and out. And Sean's going to take us a little place somewhat different with this morning's music.
There must be lights burning brighter somewhere. Got to be birds flying higher in a sky more blue. If I can dream of a better land where all my brothers walk hand in hand, tell me why, oh why can't my dreams come true? Oh why? There must be peace and understanding somewhere time, strong winds of promise that will blow away the doubt and fear. If I can dream of a warmer sun where hope keeps shining on everyone, tell me why, oh why won't that sun appear? We're lost in a cloud with too much rain. We're trapped in a world that's troubled with pain. But as long as a man has the strength to dream, he can redeem his soul and fly. Deep in my heart, there's a trembling question. Still I'm sure that the answer's gonna come somehow. Out there in the dark, there's a beckoning candle. Oh yeah, and while I can think, while I can talk, while I can stand, while I can walk, while I can dream, please let my dreams now. Please let it come true right now. Right now. Oh, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean, and thank you to Walter Earl Brown, who wrote the piece, and for Elvis, who may have imprinted it into our brains somewhere back in 1968. We have a reading we'd like to share. It's number 584 in the back of your hymnal. And as is the practice that I prefer, rather than read it responsibly, I'll get it right. I want to read it antiphonally, which we've done here before. It means instead of reading it back and forth with those of us up here on the pulpit, you're reading it to each other, sharing it with each other. 584. Now, this reading is titled A Network of Mutuality. It's by the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, but the reading itself was never written in this form. It's excerpt from a number of his writings, including letters from a Birmingham jail, his amazing 1967 Christmas sermon, and as well as his most well-known of all speeches, I Have a Dream. The words of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, A Network of Mutuality. And how did we start? I'm not on that. Okay, I will do this side of the room, we'll do the regular type, and this side of the room will join Martha for the italics. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny.
Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
There are some things in our social system to which all of us ought to be maladjusted.
Hatred and bitterness can never cure the disease of fear. Only love can do that.
We must evolve for all human conflict a method which rejects revenge, aggression, and retaliation.
The foundation of such a method is love.
Before it is too late, we must narrow the gaping chasm between our proclamations of peace and our lowly deeds which precipitate and perpetuate war.
One day, we must come to see that peace is not merely a distant goal that we seek, but a means by which we arrive at that goal.
We must pursue peaceful ends through peaceful means.
We shall hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope.
It's off. Just last week, in an after-service conversation, I was posed a question. Thank you, Larry, for the question. And the question was how in these times, with the mega demonstrations and everything that's going on out there, how do you remain hopeful? In my answer, I referenced a phrase often attributed to the Reverend Dr. King. And it's my belief that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. I went on to explain to Larry that, actually, the origin of that phrase that Dr. King noted probably the first two times he said it was Theodore Parker, a 19th century Unitarian preacher and theologian. I also shared my deep belief that in order for that arc to bend, it's our responsibility to keep pushing on it. This exchange began me thinking about how Unitarianism and Universalism in the now merged Unitarian Universalism and our core beliefs interweave with the words and deed of the Reverend Dr. King. So this morning I want to look at his quest for a beloved community and our own. Martin Luther King Jr. was 39 years old when he was brutally murdered on that balcony of the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee, April 4th, 1968. 39 years old. We can only speculate on what he and perhaps all of us might have accomplished if he had had a longer life to share more with all of us. A half century after his death, his impact and his gifts and his ideals still offer a shining light of possibility for many, yet his work remains incomplete and his dreams have yet to be fully realized. As we honor the man and his work, it's important that we acknowledge fully who he was. He was the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. Reverend King. Many people have taken to simply referencing him as Dr. King. But it's important to remember that it was his religious convictions that both inspired and sustained him in his work. He was Martin Luther King Jr. Jr. because he was the son of Reverend Martin Luther King Sr., who had served Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, where Joe Biden was this morning, the same church that Jr. later co-led. There, the senior Reverend King had long worked to create a better life for his black congregation. By the way, that is the church where Biden spoke this morning, and it's also the church whose recent past pastor and now Senator Ralph Warnock has served for many years. That congregation has a long history of engagement in the work of justice as a religious calling. He was also the Reverend Dr. King. He received his doctorate in 1955. His dissertation was titled Comparison of the Concepts of God in the Thinking of Paul Tillich and Henry Nelson Wyman. Both Tillich and Wyman were noted theologians of the 20th century. Wyman, by the way, was a Unitarian. He had originally been ordained as a Presbyterian minister, but in 1949, while serving a brief tenure of a couple of years teaching at the University of Oregon, just up the road in Eugene, he began to attend the Eugene Unitarian Church. This is pre-merger, so it was the Unitarian Church. And in 1950, he was granted ministerial fellowship by the American Unitarian Association. Dr. King was clearly influenced by Unitarian theology. In fact, there have been some statements attributed to his widow, Coretta Scott King, that said that Martin had considered becoming a Unitarian. But he knew that he could not effectively move forward on his goals for greater freedom for blacks in a predominantly white denomination. So the Reverend Dr. King Jr. returned to his roots in the American Baptist Church. He served as pastor to the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama. There he rose to prominence in the civil rights movements during the 1955 Montgomery bus boycott. There and then, that young pastor said, "We have no alternative but to protest. For many years, we have shown an amazing patience. We have sometimes given our white brothers the feeling that we liked the way we were being treated. But we come here tonight to be saved from that patience that makes us patient with anything less than freedom and justice." 26 years old when he spoke those words. With other noted black church leaders, King co-founded the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. It was as a leader of that organization he was called in 1965 to Selma, Alabama, to assist in the effort to register voters. When it became clear that the authorities would violently seek to stop protesters' attempts to march from Selma to the state capitol in Montgomery, King and the Leadership Conference put out a call for concerned clergy to come to Selma. Catholics and Jews and Christians from many denominations and Unitarian Universalists, we had merged by then to become one faith, answered the call. Reverend James Reeb, a white Unitarian Universalist minister, was among those who first answered the call. On March 8, 1965, Reeb and two other UU ministers, Reverend Orloff Miller and Reverend Clark Olson, were walking back from dinner at a black-owned cafe to a meeting led by Dr. King when they were attacked by a group of white men. One hit Reverend Reeb in the head with a club. The blow was fatal. James Reeb died in Selma, March 11, 1965. Though Jimmy Lee Jackson, an African-American hospital worker, had been killed in the civil rights struggle in Selma 2 weeks earlier, Reverend Reeb's murder drew national attention and is credited with helping to hasten passage of the Federal Voting Rights Act. After Reeb's death, the board of directors of the Unitarian Universalist Association, which was meeting at that time in Boston, suspended its meeting, and they traveled en masse from Boston to Selma to honor Reeb and to march arm in arm with King and the blacks in Alabama seeking justice. Nearly 1/3 of Unitarian Universalist clergy from across the nation joined them there. A Unitarian Universalist layperson, Viola Liuzzo, also gave her life in the cause of voting rights in Alabama. She was transporting people from Montgomery back to Selma when she was shot and killed. In the eulogy that he offered for Reverend Reeb, King said, "Reeb symbolized the forces of good and will in our nation. He demonstrated the conscience of our nation. He was an attorney for the defense of the innocent in the world of court opinion. He was a witness to the truth that men of different races and classes might live, eat, and work together." He continued, "Who killed James Reeb? The answer is simple and rather limited when we think of the who. He was murdered by a few sick, demented, and misguided men who have the strange notion that you can express dissent through murder. There is another haunting, poignant, desperate question we are forced to ask this afternoon that I asked a few days ago when we funeralized James Jackson. It is the question, what killed James Reeb? When we move from the who to the what, the blame is wide and the responsibility grows. James Reeb was murdered by the indifference of every minister of the gospel who has remained silent behind the safe security of stained glass windows. James Reeb was murdered by the irrelevancy of a church that will not stand amid social evil and serve as a taillight rather than a headlight, an echo rather than a voice. He was murdered by the irresponsibility of every politician who has moved down the path of demagoguery, who has fed his constituencies the stale bread of hatred and the spoiled meat of racism. He was murdered by the brutality of every sheriff and law enforcement agent who practices lawlessness in the name of law. He was murdered by the timidity of a federal government that can spend millions of dollars a day to keep troops in Vietnam, yet cannot protect the lives of its own citizens seeking constitutional rights. So in his death, King told us, James Reeb says something to each of us, black and white alike, says that we must substitute courage for caution, says to us that we must be concerned not merely about who murdered him, but about the system, the way of life, the philosophy which produced the murder. His death says to us that we must work passionately, unrelentingly, to make the American dream a reality, so that he did not die in vain. So that James Reeb and other martyrs of the civil rights movement did not die in vain. Now, that system that Dr. King spoke up in 1965, that way of life, that philosophy which produced that murder, has continued to produce so much violence and injustice until this very day. That system, this way of life, this philosophy, is now what we label as white supremacy culture. It seemed in the 1960s, though, that the dream that Dr. King spoke of and that James Reeb sought to help enact was not far in coming. We thought we could see it on the horizon. We found that heartbreakingly far from the truth. It is still difficult in 2023 to see the glimmer of that gemstone of hope that King saw within that mountain of despair that has been America's racial history. What my Buddhist teacher, Larry Ward, called our racial karma. The demonstrations that followed the murder at the hands of the police at George Floyd and many other black deaths in 2020 led to the proud proclamation, Black Lives Matter. That simple assertion has been met with some pretty incredible pushback, with some suggesting that it was racist to say anything other than all lives matter. The best explanation I've heard of why it is particularly important to lift up Black Lives Matter is a metaphorical comparison to a house on fire, wherein one proclaims all houses matter. For while it's true that all houses matter, shouldn't the fire department focus its attention on the house that is on fire? And the reality is that black lives have long been most at risk. We have only to look at the numbers that affirm that now. Whether we're looking at the death of black people at the hands of the police, or infant mortality, or rates of infection and death from COVID-19, to remember that black lives are clearly more at risk in America. That reality is why I'm proud to proclaim that my home church in Eugene has a Black Lives Matter hanging on the outside of the building, and a bunch of us will be marching at the NAACP's Martin Luther King March in Eugene tomorrow. If you want to do a little road trip, look for the people wearing the yellow t-shirts that say, "Side with Love." That's how you know you're hanging out with the UUs tomorrow. We Unitarians, Universalists, and our Unitarian and Universalist forebears have long embraced the notion that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Theodore Parker and other Unitarians were important participants in abolitionist movements in the 19th century, and many Universalists were key players in keeping the Underground Railroad that helped slaves feel their bondage running on time. We showed up for racial justice in the 1850s and in the 1960s, and we're called to continue to show up. Our journey as Unitarian Universalists, though, has not always been as forward-thinking as we would hope. It was only a year after King's murder when a controversy over race and empowerment arose at the 1969 General Assembly of our association. It's been called the Black Empowerment Controversy, or as a seminary classmate of mine called it, the white controversy about black empowerment. A group of our relatively few black UU clergy and lay members made a request for a black empowerment fund. Controversy arose when many delegates felt that giving authority over such funds to just blacks was somehow not okay, that whites should have a dividing voice about what blacks need. When the request for funding was denied, most of the black UUs left the gathering. Many of the youth and other white allies joined them. They reconvened at a church across the street. You can do that in Boston, where there are UU churches across the street from each other. In time, tempers calmed, and a resolution for funding was approved. Yet the association did not have funds to meet the obligation, and at the next GA, rather than attempt some extra fundraising, we backed down from our promise. We UUs were not prepared to make extra efforts to fund black empowerment. Many blacks left the General Assembly, and some of them left Unitarian Universalism for good. It seems King had been right about whether white UUs would make a deep and difficult commitment to black liberation. At General Assembly in 1993, another controversy arose over a proposed Thomas Jefferson Ball to celebrate the 250th birthday of the former president. Period costume was recommended. Yeah, blacks were rightfully aghast, as for them, the appropriate costume for such a ball would be to arrive in the chains of slavery. Once again, seemingly well-meaning whites had made an error. The good news is that GA, many folks recognized the harm that had been done. Reverend Dr. Hope Johnson, a black UU minister who had in 1993 GA been a lay leader and a protester of the ball, said when looking back years later that while the ball incident was a fiasco, it was a seminal moment in Unitarian Universalism. One reason the event stands out is because of the willingness of those involved, both organizers of the ball and those who argued that it was racist, to continue to remain in relationship. Wayne Aronson, a white minister who had been one of the ball organizers, later said, "The TJ ball, as it's come to be known, signifies to me the beginning of seeing the contradictions of white liberal anti-racism at the stage we were at then, and not being able to articulate it at that point in terms of being embedded in white supremacy culture." He acknowledged He had been blind to the many flaws of the white slave-holding Jefferson. I was in love with the romanticized dream of privileged white people that Jefferson surely treated his slaves well, and blind to the well-documented story of his second family, where his own children were treated as property. Aronson spoke about how now white people are talking about white supremacy and starting to see the whole country through that lens, a lens he emphasizes that is not new for people of color. As Unitarian Universalists work to dismantle white supremacy culture and to build the beloved community that Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. dreamed of and that we all still long for, we need to do it not because it's the UU party line, but because our deepest calling to work for justice is grounded in our love-centered theology and in our deep belief in a network of mutuality in which justice anywhere, injustice anywhere, is a threat to justice everywhere. As Theodore Parker taught us in that 1853 sermon, I do not pretend to understand the moral universe. The arc is a long one. My eye reaches but little way. I cannot calculate the curve and complete the figure by experience of sight. I can divine it by conscience. And from what I see, I am sure it bends towards justice. It bends towards justice, my friends. And may we, in our words and our deeds, help to make that so. This is the time, and is the tradition of this congregation, to invite a response. And you know me well enough to just sit with it is also okay. So if you're an external processor and you find that helpful, this is an opportunity to speak out.
Thank you.
That's
Thank you.
shortest statement I've ever heard from you.
You know, and thanks to those who created most of the words I shared with you today. You know, I have to admit, I came across just recently that profound eulogy that the Reverend Dr. King offered for my martyred colleague. And I was moved. And thank you for Larry for prompting where I was going to go with this Sunday service about who was he and who are we and who do we long to be from here, I think is the yet unanswered question.
What I take away for me, and what I hope could be generated here, is what is the call here that we are called to answer to or step up to? And the biggest word is together.
Mm-hmm.
And the biggest challenge is courage. Because some of the things we will be called to do as a church are not the things we thought were important before.
Yeah,
There's a very definite line between then and now.
right. And we need to keep our hearts and mind open to that reality and the realities of now. And a couple of notions come to mind. One is Meadville Lombard Theological School has launched a curricula called Beloved Congregation, Beloved Conversation. And when Eugene called, it's now second year, relatively new minister, Jen Young-Sun Ryu, who is a person of color, to serve a predominantly white congregation in a, 85%, maybe 82 now, in Eugene City. What would she like us to do to prepare for that? And 80 of us plunked down a couple $100 to take the curricula. And what that curricula does is a part that I like using in many things we want to do in life. And it describes first beginning to do the work within. There's work for each of us to do. Boy, I've had to do a lot of work to deconstruct some of the notions that floated unquestioned in my own mind because I've been part of the history of growing up in Oregon, in the Willamette Valley, which isn't a whole lot more racially diverse than it is here in Roseburg. Roseburg has a few more tribal people, and we had a few more Latino communities in Salem in my growing up. But, it's still the reality of here in this place. But that doesn't change beginning that inner work, because I think that inner work deconstructs whatever issues of anti-oppression we hope then to perhaps engage in together as a faith community. So it's within, among, and beyond is the work that I think we're called to do. It's on. You just want to think ice cream cone and get a little closer.
That's bizarre, but okay.
I know. Somebody came up with that description. And it works from, it's one of mine. Get closer to the microphone.
At any rate, I am a product of Brown versus the Topeka Board of Education. I was the first black student to integrate the all-white school. My front door faced the white school. My back door faced the all-black school. They redrew the boundaries. I had to go. My mother walked me to school every day. And I heard words that no 5-year-old should hear. So I appreciate the fact that you are aware of what we carried from before. I work with my church. I'm the only black member in my church in San Luis Obispo, California. And I will say to you what I said to them. If you have a question, ask me. And they did. And I bet one of the same questions you have. What can we as white people do to help you be okay? And what I will say to that is, keep doing what you're doing. You're doing it right. But do remember, you're coming from a Eurocentric perspective. Find you someone that looks like me to bounce things off of. Or you're going to still be doing it with all the goodness and kindness in your heart, and you're going to miss that.
Mm-hmm.
It could cost you more than you want to.
Mm-hmm. No, and you nailed it. The first step is to listen, and to listen to voices at the margin to help us begin to understand. Because for many of us, it's deconstruction work that needs to happen before we can construct a different kind of model. And I'm glad that I started out at the University of Oregon as administrator, where I was required to do some of that deconstruction work. I'm glad I was required at a Unitarian Universalism to do more of that deconstruction work. And I will, as a cisgendered, heterosexual white man, spend a lifetime doing some of that deconstruction work, consistent with taking some of those parts and rebuilding something that I think is truly a beloved community. And the first piece is willingness to listen, to open our eyes and our minds and hearts, not only to current realities, but the current realities of the history of this culture that was built on the backs of black labor, now in more recent times, brown Hispanic labor, and on the land that belonged to the Umpqua. And, I've talked to leadership folks before and do know we're going to talk more, we've talked a little bit about that here, but we're going to talk some more about that over the year I'm here. And I'm going to be making some phone calls to the Umpqua and say, okay, we're using your name, now what? And to hear from them rather than, once again, white people trying to decide what black or brown people might want or need. You know, and that's a key part of the work. And thank you for lifting that up and reminding us. So, did you have a comment you wanted to make, or were you just doing an affirmation? Oh, I think he wants, yeah, we've got other people lined up too, so.
My comment is that
Just look for the light. That one's a plug-in.
My comment, Reverend, is to you. As a member of the Sunday Service Committee for a long time, we've loved and admired and liked you deeply. And it was really important to us, and we're very grateful, both as the Sunday Services Committee and Board, that you are here. So I'm not as short as Al was. I was just going to say amen and thank you.
That's what preachers get to do. Amen, sister.
I didn't want you to hear more than that, because you're bringing to us exactly what we prayed would come to us, and for that I'm grateful.
Connie, can you just come up here, please? Well, I'm a school teacher, so I can talk. You can project.
Right. And apologies to those who are listening online, because that's what the microphone, the lack of a microphone won't capture.
Well, I just wanted to bring up the fact that we have a free nonviolent communication workshop happening in this church, and talking about taking a look at ourselves beginning there. Those of us who've been a part of that workshop, it's been an eye-opener for us. And so I want to welcome all of you to become a part of that, because I think that's one of the first steps of what we can do.
Right, of looking at different ways of being and different ways of reacting, which is what that work is clearly much about. How do we react to, you know, interactions with others? And I'm glad that that's one of the other things they required me to do at a UU seminary, is to do some nonviolent communication work from that particular perspective. And Martha, we've got some benediction words coming here, but I've got a little bit of introduction and background before we get there anyway. Because the words we're going to share here in just a couple of minutes are from the Reverend Dr. Mark Morrison Reed. Mark has the unique reality of growing up as a black UU, who then went on to UU Seminary to both get his Master's of Divinity and his doctorate. And he was one of my teachers at Meadville Lombard Theological School. He's written a book about blacks in Unitarianism, blacks in Universalism, and blacks in Unitarian Universalism, which were there where there were far too few, and they weren't necessarily affirmed and lifted up. And he's still one of too few black ministers in our movement. We have some words of his we're going to share. Martha's working on getting the second mic.
We have a hymn that we need to sing before the benediction.
Oh, right. We've got a hymn first. See, you guys talking about stuff got me ready to move on.
168, one more step.
I think an important part and a lesson that we can draw from the civil rights movement of the 60s is let's sing together as we look towards doing some work together. It's number 168 for those who want to take a look at the hymnal, One More Step by the Canadian Unitarian Joyce Poley.
One more step, we will take one more step, till there is peace for us, and everyone will take one more step. One more word, we is shared by everyone. We'll say one more prayer, one more song. We will sing one more song till every song is sung by everyone. We'll sing one more song.
The central task of the religious community is to unveil. I'm too close to the other microphone. The central task of the religious community is to unveil the bonds that bind each to all.
There is connectedness, a relationship discovered amid the particulars of our own lives and the lives of others.
Once felt, it inspires us to act for justice.
It is the church that assures us that we are not struggling for justice on our own.
But as members of a larger community,
The religious community is essential, for alone our vision is too narrow to see all that must be seen, and our strength too limited to do all that must be done.
together, our vision widens and our strength is renewed. Salam, shalom, amen, and blessed be. And I invite you all to join in singing the closing song, which is described as how you take the message out into the world. Go in peace, go in love, remembering that justice is what love looks like in public.
We have cookies. Larry.